UVA football. The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
You know, the NCAA tournament has started, but it really hasn't started, right? I mean, the brackets used to be due noon tomorrow, so we still have more than 24 hours in most cases to get the brackets in. But we have had teams from this, what they call first four. I prefer to call it the play-in games. We've had teams that have gone deep. I think a couple of them have made the Final Four over the years. VCU, I want to say, is one of them. But, it is what it is. And they're going to expand the tournament. Looks like that's inevitable. We'll hear from Seth Davis on that in just a bit. He was on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday. We'll go through what a stinker it was for Virginia last night. And, man, I wonder about a program like that because Tony Bennett built it old style. You know, he was keeping guys fifth year, redshirt year, stressing defense. And now it's all about how much money are you going to pay these guys. I'm sure Virginia players are getting paid. In fact, I've heard one or two of them do commercials for like the Fleet Feet store, the Good Feet store, whatever it is. So they're making some money, but you know that program wasn't built on guys becoming rich stars. It was built on hard-nosed defense, and you know he sent a bunch of players to the NBA. He's coached in the NBA, but he's got to get some players who can shoot. And they were abysmal last night. Virginia shot 25% in a 25-point loss to Colorado State. They had 14 points in the first half. And Virginia was one of those bubble teams that people looked at and said, they really belong in the NCAA tournament? Well, they put them in. Maybe it's because they won a national championship, but that was 2019. They haven't won a tournament game since. And I just wonder, you know, what Tony Bennett is thinking right now. Can he rebuild the program to the point where they are contending for national titles again? Or at his age, he's still young. I think he's in his early 50s. And I'm sure he would draw some interest from the NBA. He played in the league for a while. Would he go to the NBA and do that? Because, you know, it's just such a different game in college basketball now. And there are teams that are fun, and I did enjoy watching the near comeback that Howard made last night against Wagner. I'll get to that in a moment. But I just don't know what college basketball is these days. And there are some games that are still exciting to watch, and you put it out of your mind about how the team was built. But it's just – I know, I say this all the time. It's not like it used to be. It's never going to be like it used to be again. But can they get it to the point where it makes some sense? Because right now it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, we did have a matchup last night where it's a 16 seed against a 16 seed, and it's programs that have had, you know, kind of similar years. Wagner was down to 7 players. They had to bring the quarterback from the football team just to practice with the team, just so they have enough guys to practice. And they said during the telecast last night that a good part of the season, they weren't even practicing. They were just running drills. Now, these guys were in shape. They played an iron 5 most of the game, and they seemed to be in better condition than Howard was. Now, Howard was really depleted, too. They were having to play walk-ons and playing guys who had played a lot of basketball down the stretch. In fact, from Gene Wong's story in the Post today, he points this out, that they had gone – 11-15 following a loss to South Carolina State on February 19th, then came back to win 4 games over the final 5. Included in the run to the MEAC tournament title was an 80-74 victory over top seed Norfolk State before they outlasted Delaware State 70-67 in the final, and they just ran out of gas. But it was a valiant comeback. They did not play well in the first half. They were down, I believe, 11. Wagner got the lead to 17, and even with just 4 minutes to go, Wagner was up by 13 points. But Howard playing really well, hitting some shots, finally doing things that they should have been doing earlier in the game. They got it down to 1. They fouled Wagner player. He hit a couple of shots, and then they had possession of the ball with about 14 seconds to go. They could have rushed it, tried to get right in the lane and score a quick layup and then foul. They could have tried that, but the play was apparently to hit the three and send the game into overtime, and they had 3 looks. They had 3 fairly wide-open looks. They missed all 3 of them. The last one hit the front of the rim, and Wagner held on to win 71-68. Bryce Harris is one of their better players, a junior guard, and this was his assessment of what happened over those final minutes.
The fact that we did that, I'm honestly not shocked. That's just a true testament to who we are, not only as basketball players, but our character. You know, I mean, I can't even say, I could sit here and talk all day, but like, that's just who we are. Like, that run was just a testament to everything we went through during the season, you know? So, honestly, it just came down to playing together, being connected, make sure we stay connected. That was the mindset during that run.
Yeah, it would have been nice to see them move on because they would have gotten a shot at number 1 North Carolina. Now, Wagner's probably going to lose by 30, and Howard probably would have lost by 30, but that's a school that had never won an NCAA tournament game. It was the first time in school history that they went back-to-back in NCAA tournaments, and it was a really, really nobody's paying attention to them, let's be honest, unless you're a Howard fan. They were 5-11 to start the season. And they really didn't get a lot of attention. But when you start to pay attention, as I have since they won the MEAC tournament over the weekend, these are really interesting players. And I'll get to more on one of them in just a moment. This though, Kenny Blakeney, who's the coach at Howard, didn't get his shot to be a head coach until he was 48 years old. DeMatha guy, was an assistant at Duke, assisted Lefty Driesell at Maryland. And assistant coaches don't make a lot of money. They said that he had started his own apparel company and had done well, and through some circumstance was asked to, may have been an AAU situation, to coach, and he got the itch again and got his way back. And at age 48, which is kind of old to be getting these days, your first head coaching job, he's landed at Howard, and he's done a spectacular job. This is not a program that you're used to seeing in the NCAA tournament. When they made it last year, it was the first time since they had made it in 1992. So it was more than 30 years between appearances in the tournament. So you got to give him a lot of credit. And he's just, it saw it at the end of the game. If you watch the end, after the last missed 3, he smiled because I think he thought, okay, we didn't win. You know, the basketball gods were not in our favor tonight, but we almost got there, and I'm really proud of what we put together. And this was Kenny Blakeney last night.
There were times this year that was really, really dark for our group. And I think, like, the emergence of Seth as a leader, as a vocal leader, as an emotional leader. We play a style of basketball in our culture. If there is no leadership, and if our team isn't a player-driven team, we're not going to have the type of success in the year that, you know, potentially we could have. And Seth emerging as a leader and on the court, off the court, emotionally and very vocal, I thought really connected us for that last part of the season.
Seth is Seth Towns, and I talked about him on Monday after they'd won the MEAC, but he started his career at Harvard and suffered a knee injury, stopped playing basketball there because they don't have redshirt years. You can't come back in the Ivy League. So he transferred to Ohio State, was at Ohio State for 2 years, but was only able to play 1 because of the knee, winds up playing 2 more years at Howard, but he finishes his college basketball career 8 years after it started. He's 26 years old. And where you hear Kenny Blakeney talk about how he gave them leadership, well, in most cases, he was a much older brother to a lot of these guys. You know, some of them are 18 years old, some of them are a little bit older. So I want you to listen to this because I think it speaks to the kind of character and the kind of people that he has in the program. This is Bryce Harris and Seth Towns last night asked the question about the journey that they went on this season to make it as far as they did.
It comes down to basketball, but also comes down to having connections with who we are, not only as teammates, but human beings. playing on a basketball team is one of the more beautiful things in life because it gives you a group of brothers who have a common goal, and it allows you to have a deeper connection past just being a teammate, you know? So what we speak a lot about is having brothers, you know? You want to have brothers. You're going to go through things with your brothers. You're going to have good moments. You're going to have bad moments. You're going to have moments where you're mad at your brother's mad at you, but you guys have to go through the Rocky Mountain and get over it. So, especially to reach that common goal. So, I mean, you know, in a nutshell, that's basically what that was. You know, just understanding each other, you know, understanding our whys, you know, why we play the game, you know, who introduced us to the game, what's carrying us through any type of adversity that we have, whether it's basketball-wise or in life in general, and just carry on and be able to lean on one another.
Seth?
Yeah, I think we had several moments throughout the season where we really had to look ourselves in the mirror, and I think that seeped into the fabric of who we were, who we are, and you know, I think that shows up in the last 3 minutes of this game, and you know, furthermore, I think this will show up in the rest of our lives and how we proceed as men. So it's just a testament to, you know, who each of these individuals are on this team and the culture that's been built.
So you'd go to war with these guys, wouldn't you? And Towns says he still wants to play some basketball, maybe have a shot at Europe, but he's finishing his PhD. You know, he had all that schooling, and Harvard, I don't know exactly how it works. There are some grants and so forth. I don't know if his family had to pay any money. There's no scholarships there. Then he goes to Ohio State. Now, a lot of his basketball was before the NIL, and I don't know how much he got from Howard, but I'm sure it wasn't a ton of money. But the schooling, he's taking advantage of it and finishing up his PhD at Howard. So it started at Harvard, ends in Howard, and what a long and winding road it was. 8 years, Harvard, Ohio State, and then finishing his career in the NCAA tournament with a really terrific game last night against Wagner. If you're looking for local, James Madison is it. That's about the closest school left in the tournament. They're playing Wisconsin. It's the late game on Friday at 9:40 if you want to stay up for that. They're an interesting team, and you know, when you look at the bracket, the one thing you always look for is the 5-12, and this seems to be the most popular 5-12 upset there is, with James Madison with 31 wins, including an early season victory over Michigan State, playing a Wisconsin team that really struggled in the second half of the season. Now, they did pull the big upset, beating Purdue in the semifinals of the Big Ten, but this might be an opportunity for them. So it'll be fun to see how far they go in the tournament. Later on, we'll hear from Tony and Mike on Will Wade, who's, I think, representative of the way college basketball has flipped. We'll get to that at 10 o'clock, and Seth Davis has a few more tournament thoughts coming up, including the expansion, which he fully expects maybe in the next year or two for the NCAA tournament. But I rarely talk about the Wizards because it's just ridiculous. They're going to have, with 2 more losses, 60 losses on the season. Once in franchise history, they won 60. Now they're going to lose 60, and the question is, how many losses are they going to have? It seems inevitable that they will have their worst record in franchise history. They have 11 victories with 13 games to go. So even if they win more than half of those, they're still going to come up short of 19, which is the previous low for victories in a season. And they played last night against Houston. Actually were competitive for a while, but they just don't have any players. This from Ava Wallace's story. In addition to Bilal Coulibaly, who's out for the season with a broken wrist, Isaiah Livers, who has a hip inflammation, both of whom, they're both out for the season. Kyle Kuzma, who's really their only, real player, he was out with a sore shoulder. Denny Advia had a knee problem. Tyus Jones, back sprain. Marvin Bagley III, who is turning out to be a pretty good pickup from Detroit. They got him at the trade deadline, but he's out with a back sprain. And Eugene Oramuri is out with an ankle sprain, and Landry Shamet calf strain. None of these have any players. They got no players. And Houston's actually pretty decent this year. They won 6 in a row, and they're 33-35 on the year. So they got the Kings coming up. I mean, I don't know what more there is to say about them other than they are enhancing game by game their chances of getting the number 1 overall pick, whoever that may be. I mean, it may be somebody in Europe that we haven't heard about. That Wembanyama, we knew about him all season last year. I don't think we really know this year, but that's the plan, is to really, really stink, build up draft picks, and hopefully become a competitive team. But they are non-competitive right now, on top of the fact that they aren't really good when they're healthy. In fact, they're terrible when they're healthy. They have no players. So you're trying to win a game without Coulibaly, who's been, pretty decent as a rookie this year, Kyle Kuzma, who's been their star, Denny Advia, who's been a starter, and Marvin Bagley, who's been a nice addition to the team. They don't have anybody. None of those guys were playing last night, and I don't know if they'll be available tomorrow when they take on the Kings. They are certainly the most irrelevant team in town. I don't think there's any question about that. And then you start to look around the NBA, they may be the most irrelevant team. At least Detroit had something to keep you interested in, where they lose 26 straight at one point, maybe it's 28. The Wizards have managed to sprinkle in a few wins here and there, including one over Detroit, but they've also lost to Detroit. And they don't look like they could be competitive with any team in the league right now. And I guess it's possible they would lose out. They would avoid what happened with the 72, 73, 76ers when they only won 9. But 11 wins, not good. Not good at all. But next, since we're talking about Duke and the back-to-back championship, which wouldn't have happened in 1992 without the incredible Christian Laettner shot, which, 32 years ago. Not today. I don't think today's the anniversary, but it was 32 years ago. And yesterday, Laettner was on the Rich Eisen show talking about the huddle before that shot and the setup to how it all came about. We'll get to that next. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
I would say if you're 40 and over, you probably have a pretty good recollection of this.
Bobby Hurley up the floor with Laettner. They throw it to left of the floor. Laettner catches, comes down, dribbles, shoots, scores! Christian Laettner has hit the bucket at the buzzer. The Blue Devils win it, 104-103. Look out, Minneapolis. Here come the Blue Devils.
Yeah, that was 32 years ago, and it is regarded by some as the greatest college basketball game ever played. Some might have an argument about the North Carolina State Maryland ACC final in 1974, but this was an unbelievable game. Also a game decided in overtime, also with the winning team getting 103 points. And that was the final play of the game. It's Duke facing the likelihood, it seemed, of being out of the Final Four after going there the year before. And they were the number 2 seed, actually, in that. Number 1 seed. Kentucky was the number 2. This was the East Regional. It was played in Philadelphia. And this was a Kentucky team. They had Jamal Mashburn, who went on to have a pretty good NBA career, but they didn't have the roster that Duke had. It was the coaching of Rick Pitino that got him to this point. Pitino had replaced Eddie Sutton, who put the program on probation. They had mailed cash in a FedEx envelope to a recruit that kind of spilled out at the airport, and that was the end of Eddie Sutton there. He went on to coach at Oklahoma State. And so Pitino comes in. He had tried, was that before? I think it was before he went, or it might have been after. It didn't work out with the Celtics, and so he went there, and no, I guess he left Kentucky to go to the Celtics. Whatever it was, Pitino was there, and he had a group of players that were just really good college guys, and he coached the hell out of them, and they take a lead with 2.1 seconds to go in overtime, and there is a timeout called before Grant Hill executes one of the great passes in any sport, football, basketball, or baseball, what they call the baseball pass to Christian Laettner, who hits the turnaround jumper for the win. Yesterday on the Rich Eisen show, this was Laettner describing Coach Mike Krzyzewski in the huddle as they called timeout to set up that play.
Bobby Hurley up the floor with...
That's not it. As I said, Christian Laettner describing the huddle as Coach Krzyzewski set up the play.
He was so composed, and he was so positive, and he was so trying to get us to believe and to buy in. And if you remember, I made a shot that sent us to the Final Four 2 years prior to that against UConn. So I thought everyone was on board. I thought Bobby and Grant Hill and everyone on the team were all thinking to themselves, you know, we've been here before. We got lucky. We made a shot, and we've done it in the past. But over the last 30 years, Rich, I've learned through the, 30 for 30, I Hate Christian Laettner show that Grant Hill and Bobby Hurley were maybe thinking like our season is over, which I can't believe. But Coach K was so positive and so composed, and he said, we can do this. And he said, Grant, can you make a pass? And Christian, can you catch the ball? So he was brilliant in those minutes during our timeout of the Kentucky game.
Did you think the inbounds pass was going to be defended? Did you have that conversation?
I don't remember that. I just remember Coach K asking Grant, can you make the pass? And Grant said yes. And then Coach K turned to me and said, Christian, can you make the catch? And I said, of course, Coach, if he throws a good pass. You're hoping that they don't defend the pass. They don't put someone on the ball. And then you're hoping that you can just get the ball in your hands. Whenever I, think back on that play, I think of Ocho Cinco's book, the football player, where he wrote a book. It said, just get the ball in my hands. And that's what I was thinking before that play. Like, I just got to catch the ball and get it in my hands and see what happens after that.
It has to be the most iconic shot in the history of the tournament. I know we had a buzzer beater with Villanova beating North Carolina several years ago at the end of the championship game. But given that it was Duke and the mythology of Duke that has surrounded it, Christian Laettner, that iconic team with Grant Hill and Bobby Hurley that we know so well, that's why this has endured all these years. We look back 32 years and we say Christian Laettner shot. Oh, yeah, I know exactly what happened. I was watching it. I heard it. I was on spring break. I was in my living room, whatever it was. That was the shot that stands up, and it is regarded as the greatest NCAA tournament game of all time. Now, there was a play in this game where Laettner stepped on somebody's chest for Kentucky, and they thought that he should have been thrown out of the game. Might not have ever had the opportunity to make that play, but makes the play. And he did not have as good an NBA career because, remember, in 1992, that was his last year, and they went on to beat, I think it was the Fab Five. That was the freshman Fab Five that went back the following year and lost to North Carolina. But that was the Chris Webber and Jalen Rose and, a Juwan Howard team. They were, I think, may have even been favorites against Duke in that final. And as I remember, Duke didn't play very well in the first half. They had to take over in the second half and completed the back-to-back national championships. But they don't get there without that Christian Laettner shot, and that was the description of how it happened. A little baseball. We already had a regular season game. Yeah, played in Korea with the Dodgers beating the Padres today. So baseball is sort of off and running. The opening day for the Nats is on the 28th when they play Cincinnati. But I guess they're playing a couple of games in Korea between the Dodgers and the Padres. It's really, I think, an indictment of baseball that this is so low on the radar. I mean, you got Shohei Ohtani making his Dodgers debut today. And the start of the game, I mean, it used to be opening day. That was such a big deal. Oh, yeah, it's opening day, and the president of the United States is throwing out the first ball. Or when Washington didn't have a team, it was often that Boston would have the first game of the season. They would start it off, and you'd build up to that, and you'd talk about opening day. Well, you have sort of like a soft opening now, with opening day being sold to Korea, and it was played there. Not that that's, I guess, a terrible thing that all sports are looking at international revenue, and baseball certainly is entitled to do that. It's just that that's where we are with the sport right now. And ESPN had some programming this morning, which started at 6 a.m. I don't know how many people on the East Coast got up at 6 a.m. to watch baseball, but that's what was on. And the game is off and running for a sport that drew smaller numbers for the World Series than for the women's college basketball final back about a year ago. Amazing. Also there's an interesting war going on with the Players Association and with Scott Boras. Now, you would say, Boras, he represents players. Why is he feuding with the Players Association? And doesn't he do incredible things in getting contracts for these guys? I mean, the amount of money for the stars that he's able to maneuver is pretty remarkable. Here's the power structure that's going on, and it addresses what a union is all about. Because in a union, it's not the guys at the top that everybody's worried about. It's the working men. Not that a working man in baseball, we need to have a benefit for him. The lowest salary, the rookie salary is like $780,000 now. So you can do very well playing baseball, but in a union, you've got to protect your membership. So the Players Association is attempting what Scott Boras has referred to as a coup d'etat, which it pretty much is. Some of these guys went through the minor league system and benefited from the work of Harry Marino. And what Harry Marino did was he created a salary structure. It was really tough to get by as a minor league player. You're making $12,000 a year. You're doubling up in rooms. I mean, you're really paying a price for the dream of getting to the major leagues, and he wanted to make it better for them and was able to do it. Well, baseball's chief negotiator is Bruce Meyer at the moment. And the Players Association is attempting to boot Meyer out and put Harry Marino in. And Tony Clark is the head of the union, the executive director. He's got the call on this. If he wants to dump Bruce Meyer and put in Harry Marino, he can do that. Now, Boras is accusing Marino of underhanded tactics that undermine the union's solidarity, as he said. He's working through the back channels to get the players to support him so that they can kick Bruce Meyer out the door. And this is what Boras tells The Athletic. He says, if you have issues with the union and you want to be involved with the union, you take your ideas to them. You do not take them publicly. You do not create this coup d'etat. And it should never have been done this way if your goal is to help the players. Now, as USA Today says, there's something of a proxy war with Meyer and Boras clinging to the union's longstanding notion that the top of the market floats all boats. Boras has had the challenging winter, struggling to find long-term riches for his top clients, like Blake Snell, who just signed the other day for $62 million, and Jordan Montgomery and sluggers Cody Bellinger and Matt Chapman. Boras says, the players who sought me out to want a union that represents the will of the majority. Scott Boras is rich because he makes, or used to make, the richest players in the game richer. That he is running to the defense of Tony Clark and Bruce Meyer is alarming, according to one player. They did make some gains for the younger players in the last CBA. The minimum salary was bumped up to $780,000, and it creates an annual bonus pool for the highest achieving pre-arbitration players. But when you hear about the Dodgers spending over $1 billion on two players, including Shohei Ohtani, that makes you believe, oh, God, the money's out of control. Everybody's getting rich. That's not what's happening here. You've got a few guys who are really cashing in, and Boras is the guy who represents all of them. And the other players, they're not getting as much. In fact, I had a story yesterday that spending for free agents overall this year is down $1 billion from last year. And the big chunk of the spending was on two players by the Dodgers. And that's not really how unions work. But I don't recall ever having an agent that was fighting the union. And that's what we have here. Boras, you would think, would be aligned with the union because he represents the players. So he would be aligned with the union against management. That's not the case here. He's saying, hey, this is a good system. He's not saying it, but what he's demonstrating here is this is a really good system for me. I represent all the superstars. I get stupid money for them. And these other guys, well, be better, become superstars, and then I'll represent you, and then I'll get you all this money. But, Boras has had to struggle along a little bit differently in recent years. He was able to maneuver things with the Nationals, which, the deal to get Steven Strasburg re-signed was really not anything that was thought of as being ridiculous at the time. But he was smart enough to put in this opener in there at the right time, because when he signed his deal, it seemed like really low for market value. But, Strasburg loved D.C., wanted to stay in D.C. Well, he opened it up just at the right time after he was World Series MVP. They gave him the $240 million, and that's been a disaster. Where, on the other hand, Max Scherzer coming in with his deal, Scherzer was one of the great free agent signings ever in baseball. And he came to Washington with Ted Lerner working out the deal with Scott Boras. And it was deferred money, which the Nationals always want, and he took it. And while it seemed like a crazy deal at the time, you mean he's going to be paid all that money when he's not pitching? Well, yeah, but he helped deliver the World Series. He was their best pitcher over that period of time, and Boras got that deal done. And now with Bryce Harper, I think he thought he could maneuver the Nationals to make a higher offer. They only went as high as $300,000, and he shopped them till he got to $330 over 13 years. Nats were going to pay him $300 for 10 years. He got him to $330, but it was over 13 years, and the only reason he wanted to do it was he wanted to pass Giancarlo Stanton for the highest number ever. Stanton was at $325, so he got him to $330. But boy, he had a huff and puff to make that happen. So I'll be interested to see how this plays out between Boras and the union. But I cannot remember a time when an agent was feuding with the union. I mean, usually it's the agents arm in arm with the leadership of the Players Association, which used to be Marvin Miller, who's one of the great union leaders of all time, certainly in sports. Don Fehr, who succeeded him, and then Tony Clark, who's struggling with a new world here. And Clark, as a former player, may not be in the best position to do this. I always think that you got to be more detached than a former player. I think that hurt Gene Upshaw as head of the union when he worked with football, and I think it may be hurting Tony Clark as well. All right, next hour, Seth Greenberg lights up Virginia for what they did last night in going out of the NCAA tournament. And also, it was 4 years ago today that Tom Brady went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and how his old team and how he went with his new team went in opposite directions. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. All right, we got the last Tony show of the week today as they complete all the brackets, all the celebrity bracket pickers, and they get it rounded up today. They take off tomorrow and Friday, and then next couple of weeks, we get the standings, the updates on how everybody's doing. It's weird. It's been weird since they've gone to 68. We had play-in games last night, and if you had Virginia making a deep run, forget about it. In fact, their run ended in the first half. They had 14 points in the first half against Colorado State. They shot 25% for the entire game, and they lost by 25, scoring only 42, 67-42. Now, Virginia was one of the last four teams to make it into the field of 68. Virginia, Colorado State, which beat Howard last night, Boise State, and Colorado. And a lot of people thought that the Big East got short shrift. St. John's, Providence, Seton Hall, they had seemingly better resumes than Virginia did. The head of the committee, Charles McClellan, said when you start talking about St. John's, they were 4-10 in quad one. They had 7 opportunities at the top 3 teams from the Big East and went 1-6 with a home win over Creighton and a non-conference win of real note. So they didn't really, have, as they thought, the resume. But Virginia, what happened last night? One of the St. John's star players, Dennis Jenkins, put out an Instagram post which said "really crazy," and it had an emoji with 2 hands smacking a face, like, how did this happen? And he wasn't alone in feeling that way. Seth Greenberg spent a good deal of his career, I guess the last part of his career, coaching at Virginia Tech. So I guess he's got some ACC loyalty here, but he's worked in other conferences as well. But last night, after watching this debacle of a game, boy, was that difficult to watch. This was Seth Greenberg on SportsCenter on just what Virginia did, not just to itself, but to the entire conference last night with such an ugly performance.
It was embarrassing for the ACC. You're talking about the ACC, a rich tradition of basketball. I mean, this is a Virginia team that got in the NCAA tournament over a Pitt team, the Indiana State team, a St. John's team, and it just didn't seem like they were ready to play. And when you get an opportunity to play in the NCAA tournament, now this is a microcosm of what Virginia's been all season. You thought maybe you unplug, you plug back in, you get ready for the NCAA tournament. They had 4 games in a row that they didn't get 50. They had 14 in the first half. This is a horrendous reflection of where everyone talks about the ACC. We should get more bids. People don't perceive our league in a certain way like they perceive other high major conferences. This reflects on every single other team in the conference. When you get to the NCAA tournament, you're playing for the name on the front of the jersey. You're also playing for your league, representing your league, because the more successful your league is in the tournament, it changes the perception nationally.
Now, they've had, look at the field. I mean, you do have NC State played its way in, winning their conference tournament. North Carolina, a number 1 seed. They got teams in, but I guess he's saying down the road you lose the benefit of the doubt with performances like this. Now, Virginia's had one of the oddest recent year tournament resumes. In 2018, they became famous for becoming the first number 1 seed to go out in the first round as they lost to UMBC. They come back the following year, 2019, they win the national title. That's 5 years ago. They have not won a tournament game since, and I don't think it's going to get better for them because, as Greenberg says, you got to get better players. I don't know how you're going to do it. Unless Tony Bennett really changes the way he does things. And coaches talk about this. You have to adapt. But with the new NIL rules, with the way that you get players and you get players in the transfer portal, I don't know if he can do that. He built his program on continuity, keeping guys together for a long time, having players agree to redshirt years. And he's sent guys to the pros. He's had a pretty good record of doing that, has pro experience, played in the NBA for a few years with Charlotte. But what he's putting on the floor now, as Seth Greenberg says, you go all those games without scoring 50 points. You got to be able to score. They're always a good defensive team, but you can't shoot 25% for the game. You can't shoot 3 of 17 from 3. It's just not going to work. And to get players who are going to buy into playing the defense and being able to score, I don't know how he's going to do it. Now, you could say, he's gotten his teams consistently in the tournament. Yes, he has, and that has a lot to do with job security. You stay on the job. And not that Virginia's looking to get rid of him because he's been great for the program, and he represents the school very well. And they did win a national championship in recent years, so nobody's going to run him out. But when you put up a product that's as ugly as Virginia did last night, you got to reassess how you're building your program and how you're putting that together. All right, more on that kind of vein. Remember Will Wade when he had LSU against Maryland several years ago, and everybody knew that there was a lot of hanky-panky going on, and there was a recording of him talking about how he was going to basically buy a player. I'm paraphrasing here. But he was run out. He was run out of LSU. And Will Wade has landed at McNeese State. And not only is McNeese State in the tournament, McNeese State may have an opportunity to do something. They're playing Gonzaga in the first round. They're playing them tomorrow. And, yes, Gonzaga has a great recent history, last 20, 25 years in the NCAA tournament. But this is not the Gonzaga of old. And this team won 30 games. McNeese State has an opportunity to beat Gonzaga. And if they do, they would likely play Kansas, which is a mess right now. They just lost another starter last night. It was revealed that he's not going to play in the tournament. They are really beat up. This is not the team that we saw in the first half of the season. And they went out. They even rested guys in the conference tournament because they just need healthy bodies, and they may not have enough. So, we're looking at the possibility of a Sweet 16 run by what used to be the outlaw Will Wade. Well, Will Wade is coming back, and he's working his way back through McNeese State in a very big way. This was Tony and Mike last night on PTI on the Will Wade story.
The Cowboys hadn't made the tournament since 2002, and Wade hadn't coached since LSU fired him 2 years ago, following NCAA findings of recruiting violations. Now McNeese State is 30-3 and faces fifth-seeded Gonzaga in Thursday's first round. Tony, big programs once shunned Wade. Do you think this season's success will now change their minds?
So do I think that a big program would like to have Will Wade now? No. I think 5 to 10 big programs would like to have Will Wade now. Okay? Yeah. So he got in trouble. I mean, he cheated. He gave players money. Then you couldn't do that. Now there are no rules. You can do pretty much whatever you want. He's in purgatory now in McNeese State, but he'll serve his time, and then he's going to get a big job. And that's because of these numbers. They were, 11-23 last year without him, and now they're 30-3, and in the games he's physically been allowed to coach, they're 22-1. Do I think Oklahoma State might be interested? Do I think West Virginia might be interested? Do I think Louisville might be interested? Of course. Of course I do. This guy is spinning straw into gold, yes. And Mike, this is the way college basketball is now, and college football as well. There are no more student athletes. There are employees. That's how it works. NIL changed everything.
By the way, let me go back to something you said. Don't tell Joe Dumars, don't tell my man Joe Dumars that McNeese State is purgatory. Because he turned his time at McNeese State, their most famous alum, into a couple of NBA championships and a hell of a career, which is still going on at the executive level. But, Tony, you don't have to be a big school. You just got to be a rich school. You got to be a school with a couple of sugar daddies, and yes, I'm using that term advisedly, who basically say, through the methods and means of NIL and collectives, we got money. We can go to the transfer portal and get whoever we want. This is part of the context of Jay Wright's comment that the Blue Bloods ain't going to necessarily be the Blue Bloods anymore. And some of them are rich. They're rich too, but they're not the only ones, Tony. You can go get Will Wade and say, you know what, Mike, we got a bucket full of money for you and some transfer portal recruits.
What is the difference between Wade and Hugh Freeze? The answer is nothing. Hugh Freeze was fired at Mississippi because he cheated at football. And then he rehabbed at Liberty, and now he's at Auburn. Auburn is big time in college football. Yeah. Will Wade's going to go big time. What you're saying is theoretically right, but he's going to go big time with even bigger money.
Yeah, and somebody will be knocking on his door as soon as McNeese State is out. No question about it if they're not already talking to him. The guy wins. He wins with what used to be cheating, and now everybody's cheating, and he's still winning, and he's winning at a small program. Will Wade's going to make a comeback, and he'll be at a big-time program next year. All right, brackets. I have a bracket story, and then I want to get to what was on ESPN.com, one of the great bracket stories I've ever read. Jay Billis in the story is quoted as saying about the bracket phenomenon. When he played in the NCAA tournament in 1986, was the second year of the 64. In 1984 was the last year that it was 48 teams. They went to 64 in 1985. That was the famous Villanova upset of Georgetown. Following year, 1986. And Duke makes this great run through the regular season. I think they won 37 games total. Got to the final against Louisville. They lost to Purvis Ellison and Louisville, and that ended that. But that was really the beginning of the Coach K dynasty that would follow over the next, almost 30 years, right? So he said in this story that he doesn't remember when he went to the tournament, Billis, in 1986, anybody asking him about brackets. Well, now we got guys like Joe Lunardi, who's Mr. Bracketology, talks about it 12 months a year, and going into the tournament, that's all anybody wants to talk about is the brackets. The bracket story I have takes place only 3 years after Billis played in his Final Four in 86, and that was 1989. And at the time, WFAN was running a contest trying to get, listeners drummed up on the station. It was building at that point. Launched in '87, lost a lot of money. By 1989, you got Mike and the Mad Dog in the afternoon, and you got Don Imus in the morning. And at that time, Mike Francesa was really an expert on college basketball. He pretends to be one now. He was then, because he was working for CBS as a researcher. And he goes on Imus to predict the brackets, because at that time, '89, it's starting to get more and more interest. Now, at the time, WFAN was running a contest where they had season tickets for every team in New York in the glove box of a Porsche. And they were qualifying people to win the Porsche and the season tickets to every game of every team. Pretty good promotion. And they qualified 6 people, and each of them got a key. And then one of the keys started the Porsche. He got the Porsche and the tickets. So while this is going on, Imus has Francesa on to predict the brackets. Francesa says that Seton Hall is going to go to the Final Four. And Imus goes, if they go to the Final Four, I'll buy you a Porsche. Well, Seton Hall not only went to the Final Four, they went to the final game and lost in overtime to Michigan. And Imus welched on the bet, didn't pay Francesa off, but that's among the great bracket stories that I've ever heard. This one's better. It's written by Ryan Hockensmith, who writes on ESPN about a man by the name of Greg Nigel, who lives in Columbus, Ohio. And he's got a wife and 2 kids, and this goes back 5 years to March of 2019. And like most of us, he puts his bracket picks in, doesn't really think a whole lot of it. He's an average, not an average guy, but he's a guy who's 45 years old. He's worked as a neuropsychologist for the VA in Columbus since 2009, helping vets manage dementia, memory loss, and other cognitive issues. He's a mensch. He's a guy, a family guy, a couple of kids. So he picks his brackets. He went to Michigan, so he went heavy on them. Didn't like Ohio State because of the rivalry. Liked Gonzaga. Hoped that they would win the championship that year. And he had one time or knew somebody who lived near the UC Irvine campus, so he went with them as in an upset of Kansas State in the first round. So he had, some of those, a little bit of what everybody does in picking the brackets. Well, he got damn close to perfect. And here's the rest of the story. The odds of a knowledgeable person picking a perfect bracket are 1 in 120 billion. That's why you get, pools where they'll say they'll give you $1 million if you win, because they know nobody's going to win. San Francisco State professor Paul Beckham did a study of every men's and women's bracket since 2000, primarily relying on seeding of teams that make it to the Sweet 16. He found the women's tournament slightly more predictable than the men's, but the men's tournament just about impossible. He says, for example, from 2018 to 2020, the men's tournament Sweet 16 totals went from 85 to 49 to 94. Even the predictability of the tournament is unpredictable, let alone picking individual games. They say about 70 million brackets are filled out every year. So 70 million brackets, there's never been a perfect one. But this fellow Greg Nigel, he fills out his bracket. He gets in the car on Saturday to take his family on a ski trip to Vermont from Columbus, Ohio, and he's sort of got the idea that he's doing pretty well. Well, by the time he gets to Saturday morning, he is now 32 for 32. And he goes to bed, gets to Vermont. Ohio State-Houston game is on. Buckeyes are down 39-31 at the half, and he goes to bed, feeling that, okay, they're going to lose the game. And, in fact, they did, but it was closer than that. And then he's in Vermont, and he gets a message from a work colleague who said that the NCAA is trying to get a hold of him. In disbelief, he was told that he had picked the first 48 games of the tournament correctly, something the NCAA believes had never happened before. His bracket was in a group called Center Road, and it was the only bracket in the entire group. So now this starts to get attention. I know we're only in the first weekend of the tournament, but people are starting to notice. NCAA.com planned to publish a story on its website, and then Nigel gets a call and was told that Buick, one of the big sponsors, wanted to fly him out to Anaheim so he could watch Michigan play in the Sweet 16 the following weekend. Like Michigan won its first 2 games, so they were going to the Sweet 16 in Anaheim. They knew he was a Michigan fan, so come on out, and he decides, okay, he's going to do it. and he cuts the ski trip short with his 9-year-old son. They get on a plane to Anaheim, and they get sent out there. They get spending money. They get taken to nice places. They get to the game and all that, but they almost don't get there because halfway to the airport, Nigel realized he had forgotten his wallet. They turned around and rushed back to the lodge, but Nigel eventually found it in the car, and they turned around for the Burlington airport, but realized they probably weren't going to make it in time for the flight, so he called the airport to see if there was a way the plane could be held. They said, "You'll be fine. It's a small airport." He gets there with his kid 10 minutes before the flight, gets on the flight, and now he's flying out with a perfect 48 for 48 bracket, which they say, and if he's going to win, it's 1 in 120 billion if he's going to go all the way. They get to Anaheim after having a good time there. They get $500 spending money. They get a rental car. They get a hotel room, all that stuff. And now they're going to go watch Michigan play Texas Tech on a Thursday night. And he finds out that earlier in that day, Virginia had beaten Oregon. So now he's 49 for 49, 80% of the way. Right before his Wolverines took the floor, he saw on his phone that his run was in trouble. He had picked number 2 seed Tennessee to beat number 3 Purdue, and the Vols were down by 18 with 16-19 to go. Then Tennessee got hot, storming back to take a 70-67 lead late in the second half. Game number 50 had swung back his way, and even when Purdue managed to force overtime, Nigel's bracket seemed like it might inch closer and closer. But the Boilermakers pulled away in overtime, and Nigel and his son followed along from their seats. Final score, Purdue 99, Tennessee 94 in overtime. The run was over at 49 picks. And then things really got ugly. He missed 3 of his 8 Sweet 16 games, and one of his Final Four picks, only one of the Final Four, ended up making it to Minneapolis, and the teams that he had playing in the final didn't even make it to the Final Four, Gonzaga and Kentucky. But he finished with 53 correct. So, at 48 for 48, he was at that point somewhat of a celebrity. I don't really remember this story happening, but that's how hard this is to win. So if you get through the first weekend, and I've heard of people getting 32 for 32, but 48 for 48, that apparently is the only time that has ever happened. And he wound up getting a nice little trip to a regional with his son, which is, I guess, memories of a lifetime. So how about that? Just think of Greg Nigel as if you haven't yet finished up your bracket. Coming up, a little football to talk about. Mel Kiper Jr. on why he believes the Commanders will definitely take Jayden Daniels if he's on the board at number 2. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
We got Tony coming up at 11 o'clock today. Last of the brackets as sun begins to stream through our windows here on Jennifer Street in beautiful Washington, D.C., Northwest D.C., Friendship Heights, and rolling towards the real 2 great days of the tournament. It was kind of fun to watch the playing games last night. Well, the first one was. Virginia's game was painful, but was really rooting for Howard to pull off that comeback. That was really fun to watch in the later stages of that game. They were down by as many as 17, down by 13 with about 4 minutes to go. And they got to within 1 and missed 3 3-pointers in the final seconds and lost that game to Wagner 71-68. It was, talk about attrition. Howard had all kinds of injuries. They had a lot of guys out. They had guys out for a good part of the season. And Wagner only had 7 players dressed for the game. And I don't think they made many substitutions with that. It was an iron 5 that stayed together. And Melvin Counsell was tremendous for them, scoring 21 points, led them in scoring. So that was terrific. It is pro day for Caleb Williams in Los Angeles today, USC pro day. And reports are there's a big contingent from the Commanders that's out there looking at him, including Coach Dan Quinn and General Manager Adam Peters. And it seems almost certain, especially with the Justin Fields trade over the weekend, that Caleb Williams is going to go to the Chicago Bears. But you got to do your due diligence, and with the number 2 pick of the draft, just in case Jayden Daniels goes number 1 to Chicago, would they take Caleb Williams if he fell to number 2, or would they trade out of that spot knowing that a lot of teams would like to jump in and get him? Mel Kiper put out his mock draft 3.0 yesterday, And he has Williams going number 1 to the Chicago Bears. And while some have Drake May still going number 2 to Washington, Mel is sold on Jayden Daniels and believes almost for certain that he will wind up with the Commanders if he's on the board. Discussed it yesterday on our morning show with Chris Canty, former player in the NFL, won a Super Bowl with the Ravens. And this was what they said when they talked about it yesterday on Unsportsmanlike.
Chris, he draws comparisons to Lamar and Randall Cunningham and Lamar Jackson. And I mean, he did everything perfectly. What didn't he do at LSU? He made the same improvement that Joe Burrow did at LSU from junior to senior year after transferring from Ohio State. And, of course, Jayden transferring from Arizona State. He had, obviously, great players around him. So did Joe Burrow. Remember a guy named Jamar Chase? So, again, you think about where we are with Jayden. He can throw it. He can throw it accurately. He can throw it anywhere on the field. He can run it. Nick Saban and that defensive talent at Alabama and the defensive guru that Nick is couldn't stop Jayden Daniels over the last 2 years. So for Jayden, he nailed the process. He did everything right. He's got his weight up a little bit. He's always going to be thin and the splendid splinter. But the bottom line is he can get the job done at a high level. He's super competitive. And for Washington, with the talent level improving and the NFC, where they're not as loaded with great quarterbacks as the AFC is, I think this is a perfect fit and a great move for Washington, taking a quarterback, like I said, who didn't do anything wrong. Where Drake May had some struggles against Virginia, NC State, missing open receivers, Jayden Daniels was on point all year. He wasn't a pitcher who didn't have his best stuff. He had his best stuff every week for a defense at LSU. They couldn't stop anybody, so he had to try to match points, and he had pressure on him on every drive to come through. So I think for Jayden, that's why I gave him the slight edge over Drake May for the second spot overall on the board.
Yeah, I mean, Mel, you make a compelling case for Jayden Daniels over Drake May. I'm just curious as to the other side of the argument. Is it a production versus potential of Drake May? Why would other teams see it differently in terms of those two quarterbacks?
I don't know who has, Chris, to answer your question, I don't speak to 32 teams, but for Jayden, and then nobody's going to tell you those teams what they're going to be doing, but I think Jayden makes it interesting because I think he closed in on Caleb. I mean, he made that a tougher decision at number 1. People say, well, it's Drake or Jayden. I think it's Jayden or Caleb. Jayden put pressure on Caleb because Caleb struggled from that Notre Dame game on a little bit where Jayden didn't, and I think J.J. McCarthy makes you wonder about Drake a little bit because J.J. was a solid quarterback, did everything they asked him to do. When he needed to make plays with his arm or his legs, he did it. So I think J.J. challenges Drake, Jayden challenges Caleb. So all this talk about, is Drake going to catch Jayden? I think just holding on to that third spot would be something interesting because you keep hearing New England may not love Drake. You hear it. I have to see it to believe it. But because New England needs a quarterback as much as, say, Minnesota does. So why in the world would you trade out of there unless you like a quarterback like Bo Nix that you can get by moving down? And maybe that's a possibility. But we'll have to wait and see on that. I still have Drake May slotted to New England at 3.
So he's in love with Jayden Daniels. Mel believes Jayden Daniels will be the pick at number 2. Meantime, there's a story today from Sam Fortier in the Washington Post about what Adam Peters has done. There are 20 new players coming in. Just shows you what a disaster the Ron Rivera roster was. A couple of years ago talked about roster building. This is now roster teardown, and he's done it in a way which is very, very conservative when you look at it. This is a paragraph from the story. Peters is focused on plugging the roster's many holes with low-risk, short-term deals for players in their mid to late 20s. The Commanders have signed 20 players so far, more than any team in the league, and the longest contract they've given out is for 3 years. And that's for Nick Allegretti, who may wind up being a backup offensive lineman. Think about that. Peters brought in a few veterans at key positions and maintained his salary cap war chest. Washington still has, how about that? After all the activity that we've seen in the last week and a half, Washington still has the most cap space in the league at $56.7 million. So they got a lot of flexibility. They don't have to jump up and take anybody in the draft with all the players that they brought in. And they still have money to go out and get free agents this year and next year. And he points out of the 20 signings, just 4, safety Jeremy Reeves, receiver Jamison Crowder, swing tackle Cornelius Lucas, and defensive end Efe Abada played for Washington last year. It has been easy to wonder over the past week if Peters preferred to bring back as few of Rivera's players as possible to reset the culture of the locker room. Isn't that something? Isn't that ironic? With Rivera talking about how much he changed the culture. One team official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations insisted that wasn't the case, saying Peters is just trying to build the best team possible. There are now 6 players left over from the Bruce Allen era, and Adam Peters has now brought in 16 new ones, re-signed 4 of them from the Ron Rivera era, which now has 46 players left. And you know, you heard going into free agency, well, they'll probably want to bring back Cam Curl. Well, according to what Fortier has here, even though he's 25 years old, they didn't want to bring him back. Curl got a 4-year contract in Los Angeles for $48 million. And then he used picks on used the money on other players, and he believes, according to this team official, that Jeremy Chin is a better fit. And Chin is only 26 years old, and he signed a 1-year deal worth $4.1 million. So, you know, you got this big contract that Curl signs, 4 years, 48 with the Rams, and they bring in Jeremy Chin for $4.1 million. Yeah, it's a 1-year deal, but if they think he's worth bringing back, they'll re-sign him. I mean, these are sensible, smart roster moves, which you've never seen here, or not recently, in free agency. I mean, you know, look at what they've done. The history of this team with free agency has really been terrible. Outside of a guy like London Fletcher and maybe a few others, they've bombed this, you know, with some of, I mean, Albert Hainsworth, the colossal free agent bust of all time, one of the worst signings in the history of sports. But, you know, even going back to when it started in 1993, Charlie Casserly brought in guys who were not very good. That was not a good haul of free agents. And over the years, they just have not been successful doing it, you know. And then the Dan Snyder blowout of 2000, Bruce Smith, who was okay for 2 years and then wasn't for 2 more as he chased the sack record. Jeff George, complete disaster. Marty Schottenheimer had to cut him after 2 games in his second year. You know, overall, that was Deion Sanders, who wound up killing him on the cap when he retired and then came back a couple of years later with the Ravens. So it's not been a good history, not been a good history at all. So we're seeing, hopefully, change here. And with Mel predicting vehemently they'll take Jayden Daniels at number 2, and what Adam Peters is doing with the roster, there's sunshine and there's hope, which hasn't been here in a long, long time. All right, Tony is coming up next, and I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.